Hey there. You know what? I look at everything going on with the world, pandemic level disease, outbreaks, foreign wars, police brutality, and all of the general chaos, and I can't help but think that I just want to return to normal. You remember normal, right? Where we didn't have foreign war, and everyone was paid a living wage. Well, before this illness, we didn't have to worry about the health of the population. Well, police brutality wasn't such a big. Look, I'm Carr, and I want to make sure that we all understand that returning to normal is not an option. While I think that most leftists understand this at a fundamental level, the majority of right-wingers and centrists seem to be operating under the delusion that all of today's current problems are just a deviation from the norm. There is this prevailing attitude that all we need to do is just fix a few isolated issues and everything will return to normal. I'm going to make the point that we cannot and should not return to normal, because what we called normal was in fact completely broken. COVID-19 didn't destroy the economy. Instead, this pandemic was but one in a series of historical natural incidents that came to the surface and exposed the deep cracks in our fragile illusion of economic power. The level of wealth disparity in this country is at its highest level in recorded history. The federal minimum wage has stayed at $7.20 an hour for 4 decades. After the Reagan administration dealt the killing blow to unions back in the 80s, we now see that the average worker has less representation, less bargaining rights, and less purchasing power than the previous 2 generations that came before them. In our most populous states, both the federal minimum wage and the state minimum wage are equally insufficient to independently secure consistent housing. After the outbreak and subsequent lockdown, companies, big and small, began to shutter, showing that even in a place often lauded as a land of opportunity, we are all but one natural disaster away from the next economic recession. As soon as the workers are physically unable to continue working for exploitation wages, the corporations began to flounder. After all, it is hard to maintain some kind of financial durability and pay your CEOs inflated salaries. This is why 1 month into the lockdown, Congress couldn't wait to force through a $1.9 trillion stock market stimulus that was completely nullified in 2 weeks. I could sit here all day wondering how a system could be considered successful if it must be bailed out every 10 years. The current arguments going on amongst the worst people in Capitol Hill is centered around the idea that people don't deserve help unless they are willing to submit their bodies and minds to keep feeding the machine of capitalism. This is the normal they want to go back to. Normal to the people running our country means that Americans are expected to die of preventable illness if they can't afford health care. Take into consideration that the rest of the developed world introduced some form of universal health care back in the years following World War II, and yet while we were the only country experiencing a financial boom during those post-war years, we responded by doubling down on capitalism and protecting it as an institution for decades to come. One death due to someone rationing insulin because they can't afford it is unacceptable. Someone losing all of the financial gains they've made over several years with a single hospital bill is unacceptable. This is a society where currency is required to eat, required to have shelter to sleep, required to achieve higher learning, required to innovate or grow a business, and at every turn, the system is geared to make sure that if you weren't born into an abundance of said currency, you will fight an uphill battle to ever acquire it. This is the normal that liberals and right-wingers seem so desperate to return to. We also can't forget that despite the pandemic, the machinations of American imperialism are still going strong. The horrors of our foreign intervention didn't start with Colt 45. The 16 years that predated this current administration saw us bury 1 million people across the Middle East. Right now, we are watching the United States do their very best to instigate a coup in South America, and American corporations are joining in the pillaging of the African continent for financial gain. Earlier I mentioned how capital can't even agree on some kind of comprehensive financial relief for those affected by the pandemic, but of course we never run short of funds to assert the dominance of the American empire at the expense of millions of casualties across the globe. Back on the home front, we are witnessing the effects of a 3 decades-long effort to reduce higher learning from a tool of enlightenment and enrichment of society to a profit motive. We are no longer driven to be scholars, lifelong learners, or academics. Education has been purely commodified as a means of achieving better earning potential. And of course, neoliberal capitalism was there to ensure there was an industry ready and waiting to generate revenue off of this demand. We decided as a society that a college education is nothing more than a means to slightly improve our existence under capitalism, and as a result, many are financially barred from taking advantage of what used to be considered a public good. So that age-old weapon of oppressive economies, debt, was utilized to make sure that young adults would sign away the best years of their life to financial servitude. Years of financial punishment, all for the crime of daring to pursue higher education and not be born into wealth. Oh, and we cannot ignore the long unaddressed issues of police brutality and the overall oppressive system of modern policing. The police were never a noble institution in the United States. All the way back to before the American Revolution, police were either protectors of the merchant class in the northern states or enforcers of the institution of slavery in the southern states. The internet age has made it impossible to look away from the very real and terrifying fact that Americans are being slain in the streets by the people who are sworn to serve and protect them. And now, people are demonstrating to call more attention to these oppressive institutions. The police are responding by committing more brutality and violence against the citizenry. As leftists, we need to reject this entire idea of normal. Returning to normal isn't good enough. The old status quo isn't good enough. Right now, we are in a state of flux. The pandemic has made the cracks in the foundation too big to ignore. And it is our jobs to make sure that no politician, no corporation, no venerated institution gets to continue to exist without fear of reprisal and condemnation from the disgruntled masses, be it direct action by way of rent strikes and mass strikes, walkout sit-ins, marches, ballot drives, or commandeering town hall meetings. We must continue to amplify our voices to show the powers that be that we will redefine normal and not allow them to return to the unfair and oppressive systems we had before. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, then tell me in the comments what other unacceptable aspects of the old status quo we should reject entirely. Follow me on Twitter, where I am my own deepfake. Follow me on Twitch, where I play games and give lectures. And if you are so inclined to help me make more videos, I do have a Patreon. Thanks again.